Lauren Groff's 2015 novel Fate and Furies is an extraordinary tale of the marriage between Lotto and Mathilde and the two sides there is to every story. The Greek tragedy, focusing on dramatic depictions of human fallibility, is a genre celebrated for its hyper-realist emphasis and ability to create sincere emotional response. Groff uses Grecian tragedy tropes and the canon in a number of ways throughout the novel, including her characterization of Lotto as the archetypal fallen hero, intertextual references to Oedipus Rex and Antigone, and the symbolism of the title itself. However, the novel's main emphasis on Grecian tragedy is most evident in the stylistic employment of square parentheses to create layers of complexity within the novel. Groff uses square parentheses, utilized in playwriting to add clarification or words spoken by someone other than the main speaker, to create layered complexities within the text. Appropriating the square parentheses' original function, Groff reinvents the technique as a literary device that creates additional complexity to time and plot, character, and scene. The quote on page 357 is an example of utilizing square parentheses to create a complex time and plot. In this one example, there are two layers at play, the first and literal layer being that Mathilde vows to never crawl for another man. However, the parenthetical layer, the layer created with the addition of parentheses, presents an alternate truth, that being that fate will eventually cause Mathilde to lose her autonomy through marriage. This extra parenthetical layer is a poetic juxtaposition, utilizing economic fragments of omniscient narration to contradict perceptions of fate with a more literal vow of free will. In this way, a dual narration is created. The poetic voice stands against the modernist language used by characters, where it would be unnatural to have the characters speak poetically if their characterizations do not match such linguistic forms. By creating a separate narratorial voice for such moments, Groff avoids this. It also creates a fluidity of time and insight that her characters cannot possess, but is prevalent in Grecian tragedies. In the square parenthesis, Groff modernizes the trope that the plot will be forwarded by incidents of fate and the power of the gods. While this modernization still uses the concept of fates and gods, they now appear ironical, and as a manifestation of human futility rather than forces of empathy that previously appeared within conventional Grecian tragedies. Therefore, with square parentheses creating a complexity of time and plot, a dual narration occurs, one which effectively modernizes the Grecian tragedy. The text also uses square parentheses to create complex characterization layers. On page 292, Cholly, Lotto's best friend, sees Mathilde with another man, and in this original layer interprets the situation as Mathilde cheating on Lotto. However, the scene develops when Groff uses square parentheses to create a contradictory layer. In the parenthetical layer, it is now seen from Mathilde's interior that such acts are unwanted, and the blankness Cholly interprets as passivity is in fact a controlled dissociation. By adding parentheses, Groff reverses the situation, doing so in just 7 words. The square parentheses allows readers to see both an exterior and an interior to Mathilde. Without the parenthetical layer, Mathilde would come off shallow and be seen by readers as an antagonist, rather than a multifaceted and fallible human. With the addition of parentheses, readers can see Mathilde as someone whose vices and virtues contradict one another, making her a more realistic character than traditional Grecian tropes. Often Grecian tragedies fall into formulaic and trope characters such as the fallen hero or the sidekick. Although Fate and Furies acknowledges these roles to a degree, square parentheses ensure that while the basic elements remain, the characters overall become much more unpredictable and multifaceted than those of a trope. And in this way Mathilde is prevented from being an ice queen, instead seen as a woman coerced. Multifaceted portrayals also help deconstruct essential plot ideas of Grecian tragedies. Whereas in Euripides' Ion, the rape of Creusa is seen as something that is necessary to begin the plot. This incidence of sexual violence is emphasized in its brutality by accessing Matilda's unwilling interior. Unlike Ion, Groff is able to emphasize the emotional trauma of such sexual violence in a complexity of character. This then also creates the final layer of complexity, a contradiction between Greek tragedy's ancient ideas and ideas of modernity. By adding square parentheses, Groff uses an ancient stylistic technique to reiterate the attitudes of a modern society, effectively complicating the previous boundaries of parentheses. Therefore, by utilizing square parentheses, a complexity of character is created, breaking the Grecian tragedy stylistic from the realms of trope characters and ancient sentiments. Lastly, on page 265, Groff demonstrates a manipulation of square parentheses that creates multiple layers of scene complexity. In the scene, Matilda's uncle tells Matilde on her birthday that her parents, who abandoned her, have started a new family. Once again, there are two layers at play here. In the original layer, it is perceived that Matilde says nothing in response to her uncle's indifferent revelation. However, the parenthetical layer shows that internally Matilde is struck with a melancholic sadness after learning about her parents' new life. Within the parenthesis, Prose captures the chaos that the scene emits in its sterility. The scene, one of the only times Matilde's guardian spends time with her, is taciturn to emphasize a lacking familiar fondness. Therefore, to reiterate this relationship, Groff leaves the scene detached in language, seen through the lack of details Matilde's uncle can provide. However, the square parentheses are a contradiction of this, focusing on specificity, making sure to dwell on the impact in Matilde's conscience. Through this, there is a chaos of emotion, merging the cold and the crestfallen together, so that the conflicting emotions envelop readers. Readers are thrown back and forth between contradictions, creating a scene demonstrating a duality of emotion, despite that emotion being invisible to the characters within the scene. There is also an additional layer of complexity, as the square parentheses attempt to mimic a Greek chorus. The omniscient narration that dwells on the philosophical is a mimic of Greek choruses, who would tell the story that was left off stage. By doing so, Groff brings such action onto the stage, so all scene complexities are evident to her reader. Therefore, through creating a juxtaposition of emotions, square parentheses successfully create a complex scene. This table effectively summarizes what I have discussed, demonstrating how square parentheses, when utilized in these three functions, time and plot, character and scene, can create various layers of complexity as a result. In taking inspiration from Groff's text, I too have used square parentheses to convey a complexity of time and plot, character and scene. The piece I have written does not focus on replicating the technique in terms of Grecian tragedy. Rather, I have chosen to mimic the conventions of both indigenous and colonialist theatre. But firstly, here are some areas where using square parentheses can heighten your reader's experience. Square parentheses can be used when you want to include information that does not suit your character's voice or their limited knowledge. They can be used to show your skills of poetic manipulation or effective emotional synthesis, or when you want to demonstrate the plot, the character, or the scene's implicit and intricate contradictions. They can also be used to show criticism or modification of a particular genre or style you are writing in. And finally, they can be used to emphasize an overwhelmed emotional response in a moment of tension. This here is the introduction to my piece, Giambi. Further on, the character, Evelyn, speaks of her discomfort in living in such a place, even generations after its creation, failing to understand its surrounding natural beauty. And in this instance, I have developed square parentheses to demonstrate a dual narration and a complexity of time and plot. Using the words of poet Ujuru Nunakel, I have created a dual narration, not only through linguistic differences but also ideological ones. Although the piece is in third person, the phrases outside the square parentheses are situated very closely to Evelyn's own point of view. The language used is embellished and to a level complex. However, within the parentheses, Nunakel's prose is simple and modern. This dual narration is also furthered in ideological contradictions. Evelyn is frightened of the natural flora which to her seem out of control and determined on vengeance. In this way, Evelyn reveals a longing to westernize Giambi and move on from its origins. However, the square parentheses reveal that those of indigenous heritage know that the past cannot be forgotten, nor can the actions of colonialists. This contradiction of voice creates a tension, which is furthered in its fluidity of time. Although neither section contains a specific time, it is known that Nunakel's poem comes later, at a time of emerging post-colonial consciousness. The parentheses also infer that Evelyn's colonialist ideologies will be the cause of her demise. The narrator of the parentheses is given an unlimited knowledge to Evelyn's limited one, as in Fate and Furies, and this too helps to modernize colonialist theatre, dismantling ideas of white heroics seen in colonialist theatre and literature. The omniscient narration of the parentheses shows that despite Evelyn's current conceit, the time will come when she will pay for such ideas, therefore returning the role of the protagonist back to the natural land and its inhabitants. Further into the piece, the point of view switches to the character James and presents an opportunity for scene complexity. The scene's mood before the parentheses is emotive and certain. However, the parentheses reverse this certainty into detached criticism. These parentheses utilize the indigenous creation story of Yi, playing on ancestral spirits, much like Groff played with the Greek chorus. And through the indigenous voice, detached from the action of the scene, the text creates an economic and poetic commentary of James's thoughts, contradicting his certainty with the underlying discordance. In a way, the discordance found in the parentheses is a criticism of patriarchal attitudes of both the colonizers and the indigenous, and while not justifying the previous attitudes of Evelyn, suggests that subjugation can occur in many different ways. The conflicting moods also allow the section to develop as a chaos of reaction rather than emotion, as both layers, the original and the parenthetical, respond to James's acquisition of Evelyn in contradictory manners. Lastly, I have also utilized square parentheses to create character complexity. In the example, the original layer displays, from James's point of view, Evelyn as graceful with the beauty of a Hollywood starlet. However, in the parenthetical, we are taken to Evelyn's interior, where she is distraught. Inspired by Groff, I too have used parentheses to examine the exterior versus the interior, and what one character observes versus what is really there. In doing so, Evelyn evolves from the demure elegance James sees to a character more realistic and fallible. Patriarchal attitudes tend to only value women for their beauty, and although this piece is set in a relative modernity, it is evident to see those attitudes still prevail, which causes the parenthetical destruction of them. In conflicting word choices such as conquered versus cage, there is further criticism of colonialist ideas. Where James sees Evelyn as his right, I have attempted to modernize those ideas to rewrite the perception of colonization, including patriarchal subjugation, choosing to portray them as coercion rather than a reflection of power. In doing so, I hope I have added an extra layer of complexity and criticism to colonialist ideas. In conclusion, through examining the Grecian tragedy stylistic square parentheses, I have analysed how they effectively create additional layers of complexity within Lauren Groff's Fates and Furies, through the elements of time and plot, character and scene. In addition, I have created my own work which was inspired by Groff's use of parentheses. Thank you for listening.